Something very strange is happening in Africa right now. The continent is literally breaking apart. A forgotten sea lies hidden beneath the Sahara, and deep in the rainforest of the Congo Basin, researchers are discovering traces of an ancient civilization that shouldn't exist. What's happening here in Africa right now is unbelievable. We're going to take a very close look at it today, and we'll dive right in. Africa is a geological and archaeological wonderland. Who among you has been to Africa, and which countries did you visit? Feel free to let me know in the comments. Unfortunately, I've only been to Morocco so far, but I got to see the Sahara there and it was incredibly impressive. If stories like this about our planet's hidden secrets captivate you as much as they do me, then go ahead and hit the subscribe button right now. It doesn't cost a thing, and you won't miss a single video, and if you're already subscribed, you can really help the video by giving it a thumbs up. 5,000 likes should appease the YouTube algorithm. Thanks a lot, everyone. Let's jump right in with a geological sensation. Africa is currently breaking apart into two pieces. In the east of the continent, the Earth's crust is tearing apart along a gigantic fault line. First of all, we need to realize that the Earth beneath our feet is constantly in motion. The continents we stand on are basically nothing more than thin tectonic plates, floating on a sphere of hot rock and bumping into one another. This process creates mountain ranges and widens oceans. Normally, we can't perceive these processes. The movements amount to only a few millimeters or centimeters per year, but sometimes something happens that reminds us just how turbulent things are inside our planet. In March 2018, a massive crack opened up in the ground in southwestern Kenya. This fissure, which appeared after heavy rains, was several kilometers long and even swallowed up a section of the Nairobi-Narok Highway. This dramatic fissure is located in the Kenyan Rift Valley, which is part of a region known as the East African Rift System, or the Great African Rift Valley. It stretches an astonishing 3,500 kilometers from the Red Sea in the north to Mozambique in the southeast of the African continent. Essentially, it is a vast network of valleys that began forming 35 million years ago. It consists of two parallel rows of faults in the Earth's crust. The eastern branch runs through Ethiopia and Kenya, while the western branch extends in an arc from Uganda to Malawi. And this rift system is a sign that Africa is slowly splitting into two parts. For a long time, scientists thought that Africa sat on a single tectonic plate. But since the 1970s, evidence has been mounting that the African plate is splitting into two new plates along the East African Rift, the Nubian and Somali plates. GPS measurements show that the Nubian and Somali plates are moving apart at an average speed of 7 millimeters per year. That might not sound like much at first, but over geological timescales it adds up. In a few million years, the rift could be wide enough for seawater to flow in and form a new ocean. But why is this happening at all? The leading theory suggests that heat waves in the Earth's mantle are causing the lithosphere, that is the Earth's crust and the solid upper mantle, to bulge and stretch beneath Kenya and Ethiopia. This thinning of the lithosphere has led to massive volcanic eruptions and fractured the brittle continental crust into a series of faults. What does all this mean for the people living in the region? For one thing, the seismic and volcanic activity along the rift leads to earthquakes and eruptions. This can, of course, be dangerous for the people living nearby. On the other hand, the Rift Valley also offers many benefits. Volcanic activity has created fertile soil, and the lakes there are important sources of water. Interestingly, the development of the East African Rift System has also played an important role in human evolution. Many important fossil discoveries of early human species have been made in this region. Some scientists even speculate that the ever-changing landscape of the Rift Valley may have driven human evolution by forcing our ancestors to repeatedly adapt to new environments. This rift, which has existed for millions of years, was filled with volcanic ash from long ago eruptions and was essentially washed out by persistent rainfall. And this rift is now expanding further and further, though none of us will likely live to see the end of the process. In any case, it's fascinating to know that we're witnessing the beginning of such a monumental change. But even if the process in Africa doesn't lead to the complete splitting of the continent, the geological changes we can observe are exciting because they give us a glimpse into these immense forces that have shaped and continue to shape our planet. And when Africa has completely broken apart in a few million years, I'll of course do a live stream for you. Elsewhere, however, it's not nature at all that wants to fundamentally change the continent, but humans. Engineers, politicians, and even nuclear physicists have been dreaming for decades of an inland sea in the Sahara and have hatched a crazy plan to make it happen. In the 1870s, Ferdinand de Lesseps was one of the most famous Frenchmen in the world. In 1869, he had opened the Suez Canal. The French government awarded him the prestigious title of Viscount. The press called him Le Grand Français, the Great Frenchman. De Lesseps had further ambitions. He teamed up with the military geographer François-Élie Roder to develop a new plan. They wanted to connect the Gulf of Gabes in the Mediterranean with Chott el Djerid, a seasonal salt lake in Tunisia that lies below sea level and is dry most of the year. Based on plans Roder published in the journal Revue des Deux Mondes in 1874, the artificial sea was to be fed by a 190-kilometer-long canal and cover an area of around 5,000 square kilometers, twice as large as the Great Salt Lake in Utah. De Lesseps and Roder had various justifications for their project. One of them was the remarkable idea that an inland sea in Tunisia would improve the weather in Europe. Roder, a captain in the French army, also saw the sea as a strategic advantage for France's geopolitical plans in North Africa. The Berlin Conference was imminent, and the scramble for Africa, in which France would occupy Tunisia as a protectorate in 1881, began just a few years later. Although France ultimately encountered no resistance during the invasion of Tunisia, Roder saw the inland sea as a means to isolate rebellious tribes in the south and facilitate the pacification of the region. In fact, French imperialism played a major role in the plan's popularity in the late 19th century. Nationalism was on the rise, and Europe's great powers were vying not only for colonies, but also for prestige. Roder believed that Chott el Djerid was in fact the site of the Bay of Triton, a body of water described in ancient Greek texts. According to Greek mythology, one day a descendant of the legendary Argonauts would come and establish 100 Greek cities around the bay. The symbolic recreation of the Bay of Triton was intended to demonstrate that France was the heir to the enlightened European values that originated in Greece, and that it was the rightful successor to the Roman Empire. In contrast to rivals such as Great Britain, Germany, and Italy, Roder won de Lesseps over to the plan by convincing him that the inland sea would significantly improve the climate and thus the economic conditions in Algeria and Tunisia. The evaporating water could theoretically generate clouds that would stabilize temperatures, and streams that normally dried up before reaching Chott el Djerid would become rivers that irrigated the surrounding land for agriculture. Furthermore, the sea would facilitate trade in the region. All of this would presumably improve the standard of living for the local population. De Lesseps was able to convince the Academy of Sciences of the plan's feasibility. The French government subsequently granted Roder a budget of 35,000 francs for a detailed study of the area. Was the dream of a flooded Sahara finally about to become reality? Roder undertook 2 expeditions, but his findings were disappointing. Much less of the area lay below sea level than expected, especially the parts closer to the Mediterranean. He and de Lesseps had to revise their plans, a much longer canal and a smaller sea. The French Academy decided that the project was no longer feasible. The cost would exceed 1 billion francs, far more than the original estimate of 25 million francs. 1 French franc in 1880 was equivalent to about 0.29 grams of gold. 1 billion francs is equivalent to approximately $17 billion today. The French government withdrew its funding, but de Lesseps and Roder did not give up. Using their own money, they founded the Société d'études de la mer intérieure africaine, the Society for African Inland Sea Studies. Roder then led another expedition in Tunisia. He returned to France with a fever, to a scientific and military community that strongly criticized his obsession with the inland sea. Shortly thereafter, he died at the age of only 48. De Lesseps and Roder's research society continued. However, they scaled back their ambitions to establishing an agricultural colony near the Gulf of Gabes with the help of wells, but even that proved too much, and the society dissolved in 1892. De Lesseps focused on his other major project, the Panama Canal, but these plans ultimately ended in a bribery scandal that landed him in prison in 1893. He died a year later. Nevertheless, the plan remained in the French imagination. Other French scientists revived the idea time and again throughout the 20th century. It also inspired the development of various canals in Tunisia. Roder's vision, however, was realized only in fiction. The famous author Jules Verne incorporated the proposal into his 1905 novel, The Invasion of the Sea. In it, Berbers and Europeans fought over the plans before an earthquake created the sea without human intervention. So things didn't look promising for the inland sea in the Sahara, but thanks to technological progress, the dream was revived years later. In the mid-20th century, it was the Americans' turn to take up the idea of creating a sea in the Sahara. Their idea was somewhat more drastic. They wanted to blast a crater in the desert with atomic bombs, Far from being a far-fetched fringe idea, this proposal was part of Project Blowshare, a US federal government program aimed at finding peaceful engineering applications for nuclear devices. Launched in 1957, the project was part of the Global Atoms for Peace initiative promoted by President Dwight D. Eisenhower in 1953. Project Blowshare got quite creative. The Sahara Lake wasn't even the most ambitious proposal. For example, Project Carryall would have cut through the Bristol Mountains and the Mojave Desert to make way for Interstate 40 and the Santa Fe Railway, using 22 nuclear explosions. There were also proposals for mining and other underground purposes, such as connecting underground aquifers and accessing oil and natural gas deposits. However, Project Blowshare's primary focus seemed to be on manipulating waterways. One of the proposals seriously considered was Project Chariot, a plan to create a fully artificial harbor at Cape Thompson on Alaska's northwest coast. This was ultimately abandoned after several studies on radioactive fallout carried into the area from nuclear test sites showed that it would negatively impact the local environment and population. Even larger proposals included the expansion of the Panama Canal, the creation of an entirely new Trans-American Canal through Nicaragua, and the carving out of an alternative route to the Suez Canal through the Negev Desert in Israel to the Gulf of Aqaba on the Red Sea. This latter proposal would have required the creation of a waterway over 250 kilometers long, more than 25% longer than the Suez Canal itself, using 520 nuclear warheads, each with a yield of 2 megatons. That is equivalent to 125 times the yield of the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. This radical plan gained traction because the Suez Canal had become one of the most important strategic assets of the Cold War. This was particularly true after the Egyptian government nationalized it in 1956, leading to the Suez Crisis. The US wanted an alternative within an allied nation, and alongside all these more dramatic proposals, officials involved in Project Blowshare also suggested nuclear weapons as a solution to the Sahara Sea problem. One idea was to use 213 nuclear bombs, each with a yield of 1.5 megatons, as part of the Qattara Depression Project. This project aimed to create an inland sea in northern Egypt. The explosions would create a channel from the Mediterranean Sea to the depression, which lies about 60 meters below sea level. This would create an inland sea with high evaporation, leading to a constant inflow of water that could be harnessed for hydroelectric power. Some even suggested using nuclear explosions to revive de Lesseps and Rodaire's plans for the Tunisian Choughs. However, none of these plans were realized. Growing global opposition to nuclear technologies, particularly after the Cuban Missile Crisis, caused Project Blowshare to lose momentum until funding was completely discontinued in 1977. De Lesseps and Rodaire's idea of creating an inland sea in the Tunisian Choughs was finally revived in the 21st century by a non-profit organization called Corporation Road, or CORO. Founded by professionals and experts in Mediterranean cooperation from around the world, CORO aims to build a canal from the Gulf of Gabes that would flood the Choughs. Just like the original French proposal from the 19th century, CORO claims that the project would massively benefit Tunisia and the entire Mediterranean region in various ways. In a nation with around 35% youth unemployment, the economy would benefit from a large number of new jobs. The inland sea would also curb desertification. Evaporation from the sea would lead to increased precipitation and cloud cover. These climatic changes could enable agriculture, fish farming, and livestock raising in the area, in addition to boosting tourism. Ultimately, the economic improvement would reduce migration from Tunisia to the European Union, particularly Italy, and instead make Tunisia itself a magnet for migrant workers in North Africa. COROS's Sahara Sea is still in the planning phase, but received approval from the Tunisian government in 2018, an important first step. This plan is absolutely crazy, yet the Sahara was once a thriving paradise all on its own. And not that long ago either. From about 14,000 years ago to about 5,000 years ago, North Africa experienced the African humid period. During this time, the Sahara was dotted with rivers, lakes, grasslands, and even forests. Elephants, giraffes, and antelopes, all these animals roamed a region that is now considered one of the most inhospitable places on Earth. People lived there as well, not just a few scattered nomads, but well-organized societies engaged in agriculture, livestock herding, and complex social structures. Archaeological finds, such as the famous rock paintings on the Tasselin Nadir Plateau in Algeria, depict hunting scenes, herds of livestock, and even fishing activities. But here's the truly astonishing part. All of that changed in just a few centuries, a process known as rapid desertification. The slow shift of the Earth's axis, known as precession, reduced solar radiation on North Africa, which weakened the monsoon system. Less rain meant less vegetation, and less vegetation meant more sunlight reflection, which in turn further reduced rainfall, a fatal feedback loop. This is how the inhospitable desert we know today came into being. This is where it gets really fascinating. The collapse of the Green Sahara coincides almost perfectly in time with the sudden rise of ancient Egypt. And that's strange because civilizations usually arise from abundance. What if the people who once lived in the Green Sahara were forced to migrate to the last remaining green strip, the Nile? Could it be that the founders of Egypt were the survivors of a lost culture that flourished during the Sahara's golden age? The ancient Egyptians provided some clues about the time before them. They did not see themselves as the beginning, but rather as the heirs to something older. Three important ancient texts, the Abydos King List, the Turin King List, and the Palermo Stone, date back not just a few centuries, but according to some interpretations, more than 30,000 years into the past. Most historians, however, do not fully accept this and divide these lists into historical and mythical rulers. Nevertheless, there is new and astonishing evidence suggesting that a lost world lies buried beneath the sands of the Sahara. Genetic studies show that early North African populations exhibit a mix of sub-Saharan African and Near Eastern ancestry. Archaeological sites such as Tafarat in Morocco contain 15,000-year-old DNA, a mixture of sub-Saharan African and Near Eastern ancestors, which also suggests long-distance contact across the Sahara, which was habitable at that time. In other words, when the Sahara was green, there was already contact between different regions across very long distances, and when the Sahara dried up, these people may have migrated eastward to the region where the Egyptian Empire would later emerge. Modern satellite and radar technologies have even revealed something astonishing beneath the sand dunes of the Sahara. Beneath the western desert lies the fossilized bed of an ancient, long, dry river known as the Tamanrasset River. During the African wet period, that is about 10,000 years ago, this mighty river carried water from the southern foothills of the Atlas Mountains across what is now the Sahara, all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. Researchers believe that the Tamanrasset was one of the largest rivers in North Africa, comparable to today's Niger River. Today, nothing remains visible of this river. It lies buried under hundreds of meters of sand. Yet radar signals from space still trace its ancient riverbed like a scar in the Earth's crust, reminding us that even the world's largest desert was once teeming with life. And we know that people lived there. In the central Sahara, in regions such as Tassili, Fezzan, and Messac, archaeologists have discovered stone burial mounds that are up to 9,000 years old. Some are circular in shape or consist of concentric stone walls. Others resemble primitive pyramids. In these tombs, researchers found human remains buried alongside tools, shell jewelry, and red pigments made from ochre. Such burials show that long before the rise of the great river civilizations in Egypt or Mesopotamia, complex societies with spiritual beliefs and social structures existed in the heart of the Sahara, now hidden beneath the sand of a desert that was once teeming with life. Some skeletons were arranged in what appeared to be ritual poses, such as a mother tightly embracing her child. These findings point to a complex spiritual worldview and a clear social structure. All of these discoveries impressively reveal that the Green Sahara was not merely a transitional phase in nature's history, but the home of highly organized cultures that flourished in the midst of a region that is now a hostile desert, long before the rise of ancient Egypt. Buried beneath all this sand could lie entire chapters of human history that we have never seen. Stone structures, cities, even inscriptions, all preserved but hidden. And there is another structure in the Sahara that is so ancient and strange that it's like a window into Earth's history. Imagine you're an astronaut on the International Space Station, looking down at Earth. Suddenly, amid the golden expanses of the Sahara, you see a perfectly circular structure with several concentric rings. That is precisely the Richat structure in Mauritania. It measures about 50 kilometers in diameter, but when viewed from the ground, its full splendor is barely discernible. Sand dunes, shimmering heat, and uneven terrain conceal its true shape. Only from space does the complete structure reveal itself in all its beauty, and it was precisely this perfectly circular shape that puzzled scientists for decades. There's even talk of the legendary Atlantis. At first glance, however, the most obvious explanation seems to be a meteorite impact. I mean, just look at it. So perfectly round, so precisely structured, it must have been a gigantic cosmic impact. This theory persisted, and to be honest, I can well understand why. But there are new findings, and they tell a completely different story. During recent on-site investigations, scientists found no evidence of a meteorite impact whatsoever. No shocked quartz, no molten rock, none of the telltale traces that a high-energy impact would have left behind. Instead, they discovered something much more subtle, and in many ways even more impressive, an eroded geological dome. About 100 million years ago, a gigantic bubble of molten rock pushed its way up from below. Imagine it as a giant geological pimple on the Earth's crust. This magma bubble gently lifted the overlying sedimentary layers upward, forming a dome-like structure. The magma itself never reached the surface, but it caused the rock layers above it to bulge upward. And then the real magic began. Wind, water, and sand, the three masters of desert erosion, set to work. Over millions of years, nature ground and polished away this dome. In the process, the softer rock layers were eroded more quickly than the harder ones. The harder rocks, such as quartz-rich sandstone, resisted erosion and remained standing as high ridges. The softer layers in between were washed away, forming valleys. The result is a natural cross-section through the Earth's crust, peeled back layer by layer in concentric rings. Parts of this structure are therefore 100 million years old. Amazing, isn't it? Tiny purple spots in the southern part of the structure show individual trees and bushes following a dry riverbed. The dark area surrounding the structure is part of the Adra Plateau, composed of sedimentary rocks, which rises about 200 meters above the surrounding desert sand. This sand, in turn, is part of the Erg Ouaran, a vast expanse of sand that stretches hundreds of kilometers all the way to Mali. Sand is also clearly visible invading the southern side of the structure. The desert is slowly but surely reclaiming everything. Some people actually claim that the Richat structure is the remains of the sunken city of Atlantis, but then again, some people also claim that you should put pineapple on pizza. The reasoning goes like this. The structure fits perfectly with Plato's description of Atlantis as a central island surrounded by three alternating rings of land and water. And indeed, if you look at the Richat structure, it has a central landmass surrounded by three large ridges with depressions in between. It sounds totally exciting, but there's most likely no truth to it. For one thing, the Richat structure is hundreds of kilometers away from the nearest ocean, and there's no geological evidence that this area was at sea level in historical times. For another, the rock layers there have been proven to be up to 100 million years old and entirely of natural origin. There are no traces of human settlement, such as wall remains, pottery, or tools. The salt in the rings can be explained much more easily from a geological perspective. It consists of mineral deposits from evaporated groundwater, which are completely normal in arid regions. The alleged tsunami traces also do not stand up to scientific scrutiny. The sand deposits match exactly with wind transport and desert erosion, not with marine flood events. In short, the similarity is purely geometric, and geometry alone doesn't make for a sunken advanced civilization. Yeah, I know, I'm a killjoy, sorry folks, but the true history of the Richat structure is much more exciting than any Atlantis theory anyway. Let's now travel a little south from the Sahara into the Congo Basin. At first glance, this jungle appears to be one of the last truly untouched wildernesses on Earth. Anyone who imagines an impenetrable, uninhabited primeval forest, one of the last truly untouched wildernesses on our planet, is probably very much mistaken. New research suggests that what we consider to be pristine nature today might in fact be an overgrown cultural landscape. The key clue comes from what is known as African dark soil. These are soils whose chemical composition differs radically from that of the surrounding tropical soils. While typical rainforest soils are extremely nutrient poor, these dark soils store exceptionally large amounts of nitrogen, phosphorus, and calcium, and have done so for millennia. Analyses show that they consist of a mixture of biochar, bone fragments, organic waste, and excrement. But the most important point is that this composition does not arise by chance in nature. It is the result of long-term intensive human settlement. This means that large parts of today's Congo Basin were once intensively settled. What we consider wilderness today could in reality be a regenerated forest. grown on the foundation of a long-forgotten civilization. This is where the Bantu expansion comes into play, one of the most massive migrations in human history. About 4,000 to 5,000 years ago, Bantu-speaking peoples began spreading out from West Africa in all directions. They brought technologies such as metalworking, pottery, and systematic agriculture deep into the rainforest. The African dark soils may be directly linked to their settlements as a byproduct of intensive use spanning centuries. This type of soil cultivation significantly increased soil fertility as long as the land was actively farmed. What is particularly interesting is that the indigenous populations in some regions even have their own names for this dark, fertile soil. Among the Kuranko and Kisi in Guinea, for example, it is called Tombondu, which means the land of an ancient settlement. This shows that knowledge of these human-made soils was never completely lost. Archaeological data suggests, however, that there was a drastic decline in population in the Congo Basin between approximately 400 and 600 AD. Exactly why remains unclear to this day. Climate change, epidemics, or a combination of several factors. In any case, the settlements were abandoned and nature reclaimed the land. Our image of untouched nature is being challenged worldwide, and I find that incredibly fascinating. And there is yet another, larger dimension to this story that goes far beyond archaeology. The Congo Basin is home to one of the most significant carbon reservoirs on the entire planet. The vast peatlands and swamps there store about 1/3 of the carbon sequestered in tropical peatlands worldwide, even though they cover only 0.3% of the Earth's total land area. Environmental scientist Travis Drake and his team at ETH Zurich have demonstrated that these ancient carbon reservoirs are already beginning to release their stored carbon. The study examined 2 large blackwater lakes in the Congo Basin. The surprising finding was that up to 40% of the CO2 these lakes release into the atmosphere does not come from freshly decomposing plant matter, but from peat that is thousands of years old. What does this mean? There are indications that the delicate balance of these ecosystems could be disrupted. As conditions become drier, the peat dries out, oxygen penetrates deeper, bacteria decompose the organic material, and huge amounts of CO2 are released, with consequences for the global climate. The ETH Zurich report states that it remains unclear exactly how the carbon is released from the undecomposed plant material. At the same time, deforestation and mining threaten to destroy even more areas before we've even had a chance to understand them. We could also lose clues to entire civilizations before we even know their names. The Congo Basin is not a marginal issue, it is a key region in 2 respects: for the archaeology of humanity and for the future of Earth's climate. I hope you've gotten a little glimpse of just how many secrets Africa hides beneath its surface. And believe me, that's not nearly all there is. I'll of course keep you updated here on the channel about more exciting discoveries from this and other continents, so feel free to subscribe now, and don't forget to hit that thumbs up so we can break the 5,000 like mark. And since we're on the topic of Earth's secrets, there's been a surge in reports worldwide about volcanoes becoming more active. What's behind this, and should we really be worried about Earth waking up? That's exactly what my next video is about. Feel free to click on the video displayed in the top right corner. It's very exciting, and if you click in the bottom left corner, you can check out my space shop to stock up on t-shirts from the videos, my signed books, plush planets, meteorites, and much more. It's worth taking a look, and every order really supports my work. Otherwise, I'd say see you in the next video. Take care, everyone.